Picture the first 3 days of staying home without leaving. Nothing feels wrong yet. The pantry looks full. The bathroom cabinet looks stocked. The routine barely changes. It is around day 9 that the picture shifts. Not because of one dramatic shortage, but because of a slow accumulation of small absences nobody planned for. A household does not run out of everything at once. It runs out of the wrong things first, quietly, in an order that almost nobody predicts. This is not a video about why a household might need to stay inside for 30 days. That reasoning belongs to each person's own circumstances, and it changes from region to region, from family to family. What stays constant is the logistics underneath it. When distribution researchers and emergency planning offices study extended confinement scenarios, they consistently find the same pattern. Families over-prepare for the categories that feel dramatic, like emergency food, and under-prepare for the categories that feel boring, the ones that never make it onto a checklist because they seem too ordinary to mention. Those ordinary gaps are exactly what this list is built around. 9 items. Not the obvious ones. Not the ones already covered in every generic preparedness list circulating online. These are the items that data on extended home confinement, household consumption patterns, and reports from university extension programs on emergency planning keep surfacing as the ones people forget, run out of early, or never think to rotate. Some of them are food. Some of them are not food at all. One of them, near the middle of this list, tends to surprise people the most because it has almost nothing to do with survival in the traditional sense and everything to do with whether the 30 days feel manageable or unbearable. Think about how most households actually shop. A trip every few days, small top-ups, a habit built entirely around the assumption that the store is always 5 minutes away and always open. That assumption is so deeply built into daily life that almost nobody notices it is an assumption at all, until the option to make that quick trip disappears. When it does, the household is not just missing a few items. It is missing an entire system it never realized it was relying on. A system of constant, invisible restocking that most people have never had to replace with actual planning. That is the gap this list is really about. Let's start with something that sits in almost every kitchen and almost never gets stocked in the quantity that actual sustained cooking requires. And it is a good example of exactly the pattern this whole video is built around, something so common it barely registers as a preparedness item at all. The first item is cooking oil, and specifically, more of it than feels necessary. Most households keep one bottle open in the cabinet and consider that sufficient. Under normal circumstances, with restaurants, takeout, and quick grocery runs filling in the gaps, that single bottle lasts a long time because it is rarely the only source of fat in a week's meals. Under extended confinement, when every meal has to be cooked from what is already in the house, oil consumption accelerates fast. Frying, sautéing, baking, even simple pan reheating all draw from the same bottle, and household data from extended stay-home periods consistently shows cooking oil as one of the first pantry staples to run critically low, usually somewhere around the second week. It rarely gets flagged in advance because it does not feel like a survival item. It feels like a condiment. Stocking an extra bottle or two, kept sealed and unopened until needed, costs very little, and solves a problem that most people do not see coming until they are standing in the kitchen with an empty bottle and half a meal still to cook. There is also a compounding effect here that most people never think through. When one staple runs short, households tend to compensate by leaning harder on whatever is left, which accelerates the shortage of whatever comes next. Running low on oil often means reaching for more bread, more starch, more of whatever requires the least preparation, which in turn strains a completely different part of the pantry sooner than expected. A single missing staple rarely stays isolated. It tends to ripple outward into decisions that were never part of the original plan. The second item moves away from food entirely and into something closer to comfort, and it matters more than it sounds like it should. Flavor variety, not more food, but more ways to make the same food taste different. Extended confinement research on morale and eating behavior points to something researchers call palate fatigue. The psychological exhaustion that comes from eating structurally similar meals day after day, even when caloric needs are being met. It is not about being hungry. It is about a kind of low-grade demoralization that builds when every meal starts to taste the same, which in turn affects appetite, mood, and even sleep quality over time. A small rotation of dried herbs, a few different hot sauces, a bag of bouillon cubes, something as simple as vinegar or a spice blend that is not usually kept on hand, can break that monotony without adding real cost or storage burden. Most people do not think to stock flavor. They think to stock calories. But the two are not the same thing when it comes to how a household actually feels by day 20. The third item is shelf-stable milk, or a milk alternative that does not require refrigeration until opened. This one gets missed constantly, because dairy is one of those categories people assume they will simply go without, or that they will figure out later. But milk shows up in more places than most people realize when they actually sit down and count. Coffee, cereal, baking, sauces, a comfort drink at the end of a long day, powdered milk, shelf-stable boxed milk, or a plant-based alternative in a sealed carton solves this quietly. And unlike fresh dairy, it does not create a refrigeration dependency that becomes a problem if power or cold storage becomes unreliable during an extended stay-home period. It is one of the least glamorous items on this list, and also one of the most consistently underestimated. Now the list shifts into the household, non-food side, because a 30-day scenario is never only about eating. It is about maintaining a functioning home, and this is where a second category of shortage tends to appear, usually later than food shortages, but with sharper consequences when it hits. The fourth item is basic hygiene supplies in a quantity that goes beyond what a normal week requires: soap, toothpaste, and anything specific to individual household members that gets used daily without much thought. These items follow a predictable consumption curve, and most households keep them stocked for roughly 1 to 2 weeks at most, because restocking is usually a 5-minute errand, not a planning decision. Remove the ability to make that quick errand, and a household discovers that hygiene items run out on a schedule that has nothing to do with how much food is left. Extension program research on household emergency planning specifically flags this category because it is invisible until it isn't, and because running low on hygiene basics has been associated with measurable declines in morale and a sense of control during extended confinement, even when every other category is fully stocked. There is a specific reason this category hits harder than people expect. Hygiene is one of the few daily habits tied directly to a sense of normalcy. A shower, brushing teeth, the small rituals that mark the start and end of a day. All of these carry weight beyond their practical function, especially when the rest of the daily routine has already been disrupted. Losing access to them does not just create inconvenience, it removes one of the last remaining anchors of a normal day, at exactly the moment those anchors matter most. The fifth item is general household pain relief and basic first aid supplies, kept at a level higher than what most homes maintain. This is not about treating anything specific, and it is worth being direct about that. It is about the simple reality that minor headaches, muscle strain from unusual routines, small cuts, and everyday discomforts do not pause during extended time at home, and the ability to walk to a pharmacy on short notice is exactly the convenience that a 30-day scenario removes. Keeping a basic, general supply on hand, along with items like adhesive bandages and antiseptic, is standard guidance across most household emergency planning resources, not because anything dramatic is expected, but because minor issues become disproportionately stressful when the easy fix is suddenly unavailable. The sixth item circles back into practical household maintenance, and it is trash bags and basic cleaning supplies, specifically in a larger quantity than the average household keeps on hand. This sounds almost too mundane to include, and that is exactly why it belongs here. A household generating normal daily waste for 30 days produces significantly more trash volume than most people picture in their heads, and running out of bags mid-cycle creates a cascade of small problems: improvised storage, unpleasant smells, sanitation concerns that compound the longer they go unaddressed. The same applies to basic cleaning supplies, since a home that is occupied constantly for a month accumulates dirt, mess, and general wear at a rate that a normal weekly cleaning routine was never designed to handle. It is not exciting to talk about. It is one of the most consistently correct predictions in household consumption data for extended stay-home periods, and it is also one of the easiest to fix in advance, since these items take up almost no storage space and rarely go bad, which makes them one of the lowest effort additions on this entire list relative to the problem they prevent. From here, the list moves into what might be the least obvious category of all, the one that has almost nothing to do with consumable supplies, and almost everything to do with how a household functions when its normal routines are interrupted. The seventh item is cash, specifically in small denominations. This one surprises people, because in a world where most transactions happen digitally, it is easy to assume that money itself is not really a preparedness item. But digital payment systems depend on infrastructure, power, and connectivity, and extended disruptions, even localized or temporary ones, have repeatedly shown that small local transactions, whether at a neighborhood store, with a neighbor, or for a small service, often revert to cash when digital systems are unreliable or unavailable. Having a modest amount of physical cash on hand, kept in smaller bills rather than large ones, is a detail that almost never makes it onto a checklist because it does not feel like a supply. But functionally, it behaves exactly like one. Small bills matter more than the total amount, and this detail gets overlooked constantly. A large bill is nearly useless in a small local transaction if the other side has no way to make change, which defeats the entire purpose of having cash on hand in the first place. A stack of smaller denominations is far more functional in practice than the same total value sitting in a single large note, even though most people, when they do think about keeping cash on hand at all, default to the opposite instinct. The eighth item is a physical, written record of important information: phone numbers, account details, emergency contacts, anything that currently lives only inside a phone that depends on power, signal, and a functioning battery. Most people have not written down a phone number in years because they have never needed to. That convenience becomes a liability the moment a device fails, a battery dies without a way to recharge it, or a network goes down for an extended period. A single sheet of paper with the essentials, kept somewhere accessible, costs nothing and solves a problem that only becomes obvious at the exact moment it is too late to solve conveniently. And now, the item that tends to surprise people the most, not because it is dramatic, but because it is the opposite of dramatic, and that is precisely the point. The ninth item is analog entertainment, something that requires no screen, no battery, and no connectivity. A deck of cards, a puzzle, a physical book, a board game. This sounds almost unserious sitting next to cooking oil and first aid supplies, but research on extended confinement and psychological well-being consistently identifies boredom, not hunger, not discomfort, as one of the strongest predictors of declining morale over time. Screens help for a while, until shared bandwidth, device battery limitations, or simple screen fatigue make them less reliable than they seem at the outset. Households that maintain some form of low-tech, shared activity tend to report a steadier emotional baseline across an extended period at home, according to observations from confinement and isolation research going back decades, long before any recent event made the topic broadly familiar. It is the item nobody thinks to buy in advance, and it is quietly one of the most consequential ones on this entire list, because the physical items keep a household fed and functioning, but this is the one that keeps it stable. There is also a structural reason analog activity outperforms screens over a long stretch, and it has nothing to do with content quality. A phone or a streaming service depends on a chain of things staying available at once: power, signal, a shared connection split across every device in the house, a battery that has to be rationed rather than assumed. A deck of cards depends on nothing. It works the same on day 1 as it does on day 30, regardless of what else in the house is running low or acting unreliable. That kind of consistency turns out to matter more for morale than almost anything else on this list, precisely because it is the one item that cannot fail. Before going further, it is worth pausing on something that connects all 9 of these. None of them are expensive. None of them require special sourcing or a specialty store. Every single item mentioned so far is available at an ordinary supermarket, most of them for a few dollars or less, and the total cost of covering every gap on this list rarely exceeds the cost of a single unplanned grocery run made in a panic once the shortage has already started. That is really the core insight underneath this entire video. The expensive version of preparedness is the one nobody planned, done in a rush, at inflated urgency pricing, after the gap has already become a problem. The inexpensive version is the one built quietly, ahead of time, item by item, without any drama attached to it at all. If this kind of analysis is useful, the most straightforward way to keep seeing more of it is to subscribe. Since this channel builds these breakdowns regularly, always working from the same principle, specific data over vague warnings, and always focused on ordinary items available at any regular store. There is no product being sold here, and nothing being pushed beyond the information itself, just a habit of looking closer at what most households overlook. Something else worth mentioning, because it connects several of these items together in a way that is easy to miss. Notice how the categories interact with each other. Cooking oil and flavor variety both address the same underlying issue, which is that extended time at home is not just a logistics problem. It is an experience that has to remain livable, not just survivable. Hygiene supplies and cleaning materials both address a version of the same thing, the slow erosion of a sense of order and control inside a space that is being occupied constantly, instead of just visited between errands and work and normal life. Cash and the written information sheet are both about resilience against a very specific kind of failure, the failure of systems that normally run invisibly in the background, and that almost nobody thinks about until they stop working. And the analog entertainment item, sitting almost last on this list, addresses something that ties every other item together, because none of the physical supplies matter much if the household inside them is not holding up mentally across the full stretch of time. There is a pattern worth noticing in how most people approach preparedness generally, not just for this specific scenario. They tend to prepare for the version of the problem that feels serious and dramatic, and they tend to skip the version that feels mundane and small. Emergency food, generators, water storage, these get attention because they sound like preparedness. Cooking oil, trash bags, a deck of cards, these get skipped because they sound like nothing. But household consumption data on extended confinement periods tells a consistent story, and it is that the mundane items are almost always the ones that run out first, not because they matter less, but because they get consumed at a rate nobody accounts for when the routine that normally replenishes them quietly, a quick stop at the store, a 5-minute errand, simply is not available anymore. None of this is about predicting a specific event or suggesting that anyone needs to brace for something particular. The reasoning here holds regardless of the reason a household might end up staying home for an extended stretch, whether that is severe weather, an extended power disruption, a personal circumstance, a temporary job situation, or simply choosing to be ready rather than caught off guard. The value of walking through a list like this is not the list itself. It is the habit of thinking in terms of actual consumption instead of assumptions, of asking what a kitchen, bathroom cabinet, and a daily routine actually require across 30 real days instead of what feels intuitively sufficient when everything is running normally. One more thing worth being honest about before closing this out, since it matters more here than in most other kinds of preparedness content. Nothing in this video is medical guidance, and nothing here should replace an actual conversation with a doctor or pharmacist about individual health needs, medications, or conditions that matter specifically to one household and not another. What has been laid out here is general planning information, the kind of thing that applies broadly across most households, not personalized advice for any one situation. If there is a specific health circumstance in the mix, someone with the right training, whether that is a doctor, a pharmacist, or another qualified professional, is always the better source than a video, no matter how much research sits behind it. That is not a formality tacked onto the end. It is simply consistent with everything this channel tries to do, which is give real, specific, useful information while being honest about where its usefulness ends. 30 days sounds like a long time until it is broken down item by item, and once it is, most of it turns out to be manageable, inexpensive, and almost boring to prepare for, which in the end might genuinely be the most reassuring thing about the entire list. The households that handle extended time at home the most smoothly are rarely the ones with the most dramatic setup. They are the ones who quietly filled in the small, unglamorous gaps before they ever became a problem worth noticing. Go back through these 9 one more time, not as a shopping list this time, but as a kind of test. Cooking oil, flavor variety, shelf-stable milk, hygiene supplies, basic pain relief, trash bags and cleaning supplies, small denomination cash, a written record of essential information, and something to do that needs no power at all. 9 items, almost none of them expensive, almost none of them dramatic, and yet together they cover nearly every quiet gap that extended data on home confinement keeps pointing back to. That is really the difference between preparedness that looks impressive and preparedness that actually holds up when it is tested. The impressive version photographs well. The version that works is usually sitting in a kitchen cabinet, unnoticed, until the exact week it turns out to matter most.